Okay, hello and welcome to this tutorial. This is going to be an abstract contemporary painting tutorial for beginner to intermediate level students. And we are starting with a stretched canvas. This is just a lightweight stretched canvas. It's 18 by 24 and it has been coated with a prepped coat of titanium white that is fully dry. I do suggest that you prep all of your canvases with either a coat of gesso or a coat of titanium white just to give it a nice smooth surface on which to work and help absorb some of that paint into the tooth of the canvas. You can put 2 or 3 coats if you want an ultra smooth background as well. So getting started with this, what we're going to do is we're going to lightly mist our canvas with just a little water. Not a lot of water, just a light mist, so everything's a little bit damp. I've got a flat brush with a little bit of water on it, and I am going to lay down a few different blues. We're going to create a background, so this is just a little bit. Sometimes these tubes get stuck. Oh dear, that came out way more than I wanted it to. We're going to create just a little bit with our paint. I've got a blue-gray. This is a Prussian blue. And I'm also going to put just a couple drops of ultramarine blue. This is a high flow that I'm using, but you can use any type. And again, a couple mists, and just start moving the paint around. This high flow is going to really act sort of like watercolory. It doesn't matter how it looks at this point. We're going to be covering up most of this. I also have the soft body that we're moving through, and then the Prussian for the deeper look here in the bottom area. So again, work with a brush and a canvas that's a little damp so you can move the paint around. Stand back, you can mist lightly to add just a little more water. Again, take it out to the edges, but don't be overly concerned with the level of color that's, saturated or not fully saturated in some areas. Just make sure you kind of get everything covered, especially to the sides there. You can go over this to create those gradations of color, which is really pretty. Just like I'm doing here, go up and down to kind of blend. You see that creates that blend. This is pretty dark. There's a lot of intensity here. Don't worry, we are going to go back over it with some additional color. Mixes. So at this point, you really don't want every drop of canvas covered, because that's going to also help some of the underlying colors show through as sort of a transparency when we go ahead and lay some of our other layers on here. We are going to create this painting in layers, which is something you want to do for a more interesting and a more sophisticated higher end painting. There are a lot of paintings out there you can watch videos on that just drop the paint on canvas and they create something, with fully saturated color the first go around. But if you will really look at it, you won't see a lot of building and a lot of that transparency and translucency coming through unless you work in this fashion of layering your colors. So at this point, we're going to call it good. It looks like a big mess, but that's okay. Don't freak out. Just kind of get something down that looks like this. It's okay to leave some edges that are unfinished here. As a matter of fact, I think you should. Do not concentrate the paint completely. You can. I have on one corner a little bit more here, down here, but at this point, this is kind of where we want to be. If you don't have these exact colors, I would suggest getting the Prussian blue. You can add a tiny bit of black and a spot of black, or shading gray, or a little gray to that to create more of a blue gray. You might have to add just a drop of white to lighten that if it's too much. The ultramarine, you can use a cobalt blue or any shade of brighter blue that you might have. So this is just our first layer, and we're going to let this dry thoroughly, very thoroughly. So I suggest at least 24 hours for a good dried underlayer. Longer is even better, and then we can come back and start building on top of it. All right, we are back, and this has fully and completely dried. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix together some metallic gold, just a little bit. Got about that much in my container. I'm going to take some of that Prussian blue that we used, add just a little of that. I'm going to take some of my satin glaze, and this is an acrylic satin glaze medium. I'm putting this all together in a container, and that's about the ratio. So I'd say it's about half and half gold and blue, and a couple good-sized tablespoons of the glaze. I'm going to add some water to that medium to break it down a little bit. I'm going to mist my painting, and the reason I'm going to mist it is because I know it's good and dry. It's dried for at least 48 hours. So you don't want to mist a painting any sooner than that. Even 24 hours, you could get water spots. So make sure your painting is good and dry a few days, actually, before you mist it. If you don't want to mist it, you can just put a little water on your brush and go over it quickly. Very little bit of water just to move the paint around that we're going to apply. And that's perfectly fine to do versus misting. Misting your canvas is very, quick and easy, and I do like it for laying down a very light coat of hydration before I add my paints. But again, be very careful before you mist, and make sure your paints are very, very dry. At least 48 hours, if not longer. Sometimes if you have a painting and you haven't worked on it in 2 or 3 weeks, perfectly fine to come back and mist it. If it's been 24 hours or even that same day, do not do that. All right, so I'm going to take some of that mixture. I've mixed it up very loosely. I'm going to go around some of these areas that we did not cover, that have the white. I'm going to move it just a little bit over that. You're going to get some striations of the gold coming through with the blue. And I'm going to take a damp paper towel now, and I'm going to kind of blend some of that off the canvas, because I really don't want that full intensity of color. We're going to get a lot of translucency by kind of doing this and working with the glazes. Alright, so I've taken some of that off now, and what I want to do is I'm going to add a little gold just in a couple of these spots. take the brush that I had. I'm not adding any paint. Actually, I'm trying to take some off here. I'm going to go over that again. And really what I'm doing is I'm just adding layers of color, and those bottom layers and the movement, the brush strokes, will show through. Like I'm doing over here, I'm bringing it all the way down, and then I'm moving it side to side. Same thing here. Bring a little here and moving it side to side. Now, by doing this, instead of getting that full bling of the gold, we're going to get that shimmer of the gold coming through, but again, without the full metallic of the gold. Metallics are great to work with for that because they will add a certain level of shimmer and luminosity to your painting, even if you're not really a metallic person. If you really don't want the metallics, or you don't want the full sort of bling pop of the metallics, they add not only color, but they add a pretty shimmer. Now I'm taking a little more of my first glaze, the deeper blue. I'm going over those lightly. And again, just work this very lightly so you have those layers coming through, because there's no point in putting all the layers down if you're just going to cover them with subsequent layers when you're going over it. So you want to lay your paints down judiciously. Just be very, very light-handed and going over this. And as you can see, there's a lot of layers and colors coming through the bottom here. And as we do lay them down, you're going to get, a lot of different light and darkness and layers and translucencies or transparencies based on the fact that we did not cover everything with paint in one fell swoop on the first go around. We left some light areas, and we are removing, adding paint, working with metallics, and working with our glazes. And glazes are always going to allow you to lay down multiple layers and have the paints and the colors show through from underneath, which is really why I do like to work with those. So I'm just going to go around and work my painting. Yours is going to be similar. It's going to be different. It's an original work of art. It should not look exactly like mine. It should just be similar to this painting because you're creating your own artwork. So sometimes I get students that are worried that their painting isn't identical, or they've missed a little point of shadow here or there or something. And that really doesn't matter as long as you're understanding the techniques and the steps that we're taking to get those. And again, if you have questions, just an email away. I'm happy to answer questions, because I do know sometimes when you're doing this, it looks easy, and then you start to do it, and all of a sudden you find yourself in a little trouble zone, and you don't know how to get out of it, or you are wondering what to do next, or maybe how to fix something. So I'm just working my painting, the areas. I'm taking a little of my paper towel and just adding and subtracting where I just want a little bit more. Now, when you work with glazes and metallics, you have to fairly work quickly. They're not particularly forgiving as far as that goes, because they can start to lift, and when they do and they start getting tacky and dry, they start to lift, and sometimes that can give you some very cool effects if you know how to work that. But at first, if you're not particularly sure, that can be a little bit scary. So As you can see, I've got a lot of different variations of tone, shades, colors coming through on my background here. So that's essentially what we want in this layer. You want to have a lot of depth, but you want to have certain areas of light, certain areas of dark. So we're going to let this dry really well, and this is going to dry minimum 24 hours, if not 48 hours, really for best results. And I know that's sometimes hard to wait, but trust me, if you really let it dry, you're going to be so much happier in the end. All right, so before we let this fully dry, we're going to take what paint we have on our brush, and we're going to lay down flat and just kind of move it up and down. And this is going to give you another look of texture and interest to the background of your painting here. Now, I wouldn't suggest you're going to do this all over the place. But if you choose a couple of key target areas where you'd want to do something like this, you just lay flat. If you want to pick up more paint, you can. And then you just lay your brush flat and just kind of let it do its thing. And of course, if you work quickly, you can move the paint around, you can remove a little. And it kind of just gives you a really interesting modern look to the background of your painting here. That's not a typical, it's not a typical palette knife. It's not a typical brush stroke. It just looks like, how'd you do that? So it's very good to do with inks as well. So we have this paint on our brush, so we're just going to use that. But you'll find that I do like to do that technique in my paintings. So if you've had other tutorials, you know that that's something that I like to add into my paintings. Okay, so that's basically it for this session, and we're going to let this dry really well, really well, 24 to 48 hours. Trust me when I say you need that long, especially when we're working with glazes, metallics, things like that, and various layers. The more you let it dry, the happier you'll be and the nicer your final painting will turn out. If you come back too quickly and you start working on it and it's not fully cured, you can start to lift it, you can get spots, a whole variety of things can happen that you're not going to be too thrilled about. Trust me on that. Been there, done that. So let this dry really well. If a minimum 24 hours, 48 hours is better, and then we'll come back and start to finish it up. All right, we're back, and this has fully dried completely. We are ready to now add some texture over this. And what I'm going to use is I'm using an extra heavy gel semi-gloss. I would suggest that you do use a gel for this layer versus a paste because this will dry more transparent than a paste will. A paste will tend to dry a little more opaque and chalky, and this will dry clear since we're putting it over color, but it's really up to you. I just would suggest that. So I'm taking some on my palette knife, and I'm going to just sort of start to drop bits, not that much, across and up. So I wanted to kind of create my line a little bit higher on the sides here and a little more of a dip down here. So at this point, once you have your line done, and you can do that with just a piece of gel strung across, you can go over it and start to create your texture with some multiple directionality and different strokes with your palette knife. I would always suggest using a palette knife to lay down texture, because using a brush, it's really hard to clean, and a palette knife or a tool like it, it's much more suited for a texture application. So as you come through here, now this looks white, but don't be alarmed. It's going to dry essentially clear. So any color that shows through will just look like a semi-gloss. So I have some of these areas a little bit heavier. Some are a little lighter. I'm gonna balance it out over here a little bit. You can lay this pattern in whatever you like. If you're not a fan of the dip down, that's just what it's going to be to create this painting, but you can of course do a straight line or whatever type of pattern you think is going to look best for you. I want this to essentially be the same on both sides here with a lower spot down here. And working with texture just requires you to play with it a bit, finesse it, get it so it looks good to you. I also like to, this is just a personal choice, but I like to soften any hard lines of my palette knife mostly. There are a few, like right here, that I'll leave that's kind of interesting, that ties in all the way across, but I do essentially work to kind of come up and smooth those lines out a little bit. All right, so we have this laid pretty much sideways. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some, as you can see, and I'm using my palette knife in an up and down formation here. And I'm just going to bring that through on both sides, and then just a little bit here in the center. All right, so that's pretty much what I'm going to leave it at, smoothing these lines again. I'm going to let this dry really well, probably at least 48 hours. You could conceivably work on this in 24 hours, especially if you live in a dry climate and things tend to dry and cure quickly for you. If you're in a very humid climate, things may take a little bit longer to dry, and so I would do 48 hours, 72 hours, something like that. So that's essentially the line that we have on this with our texture. We're going to apply some color over this in our next session and start highlighting this particular level of texture. Okay, we have fully dried this texture, as you can see kind of in the light there, what it looks like. So it's dried clear, and what I've mixed up is just a little bit of a cadmium orange and a little gold metallic. I'm going to mix these up together. Just want a little pop of color on my brush, so you can see it's a real pretty sort of corally shimmer color. And I'm going to lay this down. Washing this over this texture to pick up as much as possible, but not too much. I just want a light layer of this to come through underneath. Pulling it down, pick up just a little more. I'm going to take a piece of paper towel, it's dry, I'm going to work that in to that background layer, just like that. So I'm going to have some of the strokes of the brushes, some of it's going to be diffused. Then I'm going to take a little bit of water on my paper towel, go over a couple areas where I want to kind of break it up just a little. A little more water. I'm breaking up any obvious lines. I really want that texture highlighted without it looking too strong. I want it kind of subtle. And I want that shimmer in the background. Okay, so that's pretty much where I want to be. And we've worked very, very light, so we can go ahead and we can apply something on top. That's going to give us that look. Working up here on the top, you can take a little more if you like and lay it around the edges of that texture. And I'm just going to put a little bit up here. Tying it all in. Using what I already had on my palette, just a very light coat around the edges. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to the blue that I had mixed up for the bottom layer. I'm just going to grab my brush, pick up some of that. I don't have too much left right there. It's been sitting for a few days, so just a little bit is left on my brush. And I am going to move in the same way that I just did that last layer. Essentially, put a little water on my canvas, and I'm going to move some of that blue onto the top of that last layer. I'm working very light. I'm not depositing a lot of paint. Bringing it right down into that last layer of gold. Okay. As you can see, that's sort of the effect that we've gotten from doing that. I'm going to go ahead and put some water up here, lay down anything left from my brush. And this is a good way to layer colors and have all the same colors tie in on your painting, but get multiple layers. Is, you know, mix that color up, your base color, like I did in the beginning, and then you can refer back to it and mix in more metallic. You can mix in, you can layer it again on top of other colors that you lay down, which is going to give you that multiple layered effect, and it's still all going to tie in with the same tones and colors. And instead of you going back and trying to remix something, you may or may not get the same ratio right. You may or may not have picked up the same blue. You know, you have to be careful. If it's several days later, you may not exactly remember which blue that you used, if you have several, which has happened to me before. So you know, just mix up what you think you're going to need and a little extra, and you know, put it in a resealable container. And if you don't end up using it on this painting or the current work of art, then you can always use it on a different one. You can add some other colors to it to create a whole completely new tone. All right, so that's giving us a very pretty layered type of effect here without being that obvious, you know, straight line, and giving us a pretty look of multiple layers. I'm just filling in some spots with some of that blue around the edge of my canvas that might have kind of got left a little raw. You can fill in a little more paint in a couple spots, bring that sort of cascade look down into that gold a little more, just working very lightly. I hardly have anything on my brush, just a little blue, a little water. Be sure you don't put too much water on your brush when you're working like this, because water will eat through acrylics, and anything that you've lifted, or I mean that you've put down, if you put a lot of water on top of it, it's going to lift it. So you want to really work with very light bits of color, light bits of water. If you do find that you need to add a little water, do so on a paper towel, and do not mist your canvas. You can always just kind of lightly go over an area that needs a little more diffusion or blending with just a light hand and some paper towel. I would use paper towel over sponge. Sponge can grab too much water. Paper towel will allow you to just put down a little bit. All right, so we have a very pretty area around the sides here. We have a very pretty area in the center here with multiple layers of color and shimmer, as you can see. So I'm going to let this dry thoroughly. Going to finish the sides. And I believe I'm going to do these in a black because I think just the white would not quite look right. So I'm going to go ahead and take a little blue of the blue I have left. I'm going to put in a little bit of black, kind of give it a blue-black look. It'll have just a hint of shimmer from that metallic. And finish my sides off. Let it dry thoroughly, 24 hours. And then I'm going to put my final glaze and then varnish on this. Mix in a little cadmium orange and gold to give highlight. Laying down very softly, just to pick up a little bit of texture. And highlight with a little pop of that coral.